Alright, I know I said I'd see everybody in a couple weeks, but I lied. I forgot I have to get the Snappad modified on this stabilizer jack today. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to go about doing that. But first, I want to recap something when it comes to the fresh water system and sanitization that I may have left out, and something that a viewer had mentioned. The first thing I forgot to mention is, once I run all the sanitizing solution out of the fresh tank using my faucet, and what I like to do is fill my gray tank all the way up with that sanitizing solution, and I'll typically let that sit about 8 to 10 hours also. And if you want, you can do that, drive your trailer around, let it shake up that tank and get any of that nasty stuff that could be in your gray tank out. But just remember, if you're draining a full fresh tank in this tab, that's 19 gallons, your gray tank is only 18. So make sure you don't overfill your gray tank. The other thing I left out was, if you have the Aldi system, you can go into your menu button here, and you're going to come over to here, the little gear icon, and we're going to scroll down. If you have this little killer Pac-Man with teeth showing with a cross through it, you can hit that. And what that's going to do is it's going to heat that boiler a little hotter than normal. And you can actually go into your settings here and watch your glycol temps rise a little hotter. And I think that kicks on at night at a certain time. And that's going to kill off any possible, I think it's like Legionnaire or any kind of bacteria or viruses that could be in that tank. So that's another part of water sanitation, and why I didn't really bother to run any kind of sanitizer through the hot water lines in this trailer. Now, going back to that, I did have a viewer that mentioned this little tip. I haven't tried it yet, but in theory it makes sense. Coming over to the Nautilus system here, he had mentioned that when I was in sanitizer mode here, if I want to sanitize to just the lines, the hot lines, and not suck anything into the hot water tank, I can take and turn this valve that way from that. And that makes a lot of sense, I think, because if you go to siphon winterize mode, that should close off the hot water tank by doing that. So kind of a mix between sanitizing that. Maybe it'll run through those lines also. Or maybe just run it through the winterizer mode when you want to sanitize just the lines, because I'm pretty sure if you did it that way, it would only go into the lines. Oh, and I almost forgot. The most important thing about this Nautilus system. Right below your pump switch is a red indicator light. And below that is a red switch. Never, ever hit the red switch. If you hit this red switch, just like this, just kidding. I'm not sure what they were going to use that for. I think maybe that was for a tank flush for another model or something. Okay, our next order of business is to address this clearance issue when it comes to the pad foot on the stabilizer and this drain pipe here. And as you can see, I only have about a finger's worth of space here to work with when it comes to using that RV Snappad. So I'm gonna have to do some chopping and cutting here. Now coming on down from underneath, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. We don't have much of a gap. And when looking at this stabilizer setup here, there is no adjustment from front to back, so I can't move that. So first things first here, I need to get this thing unbolted. Nothing too complex. You just got a nylock nut and a through bolt. And then I got to run down to the hardware store and get some hardware, because conveniently there's already a little hole here, and I'm going to use that to hold this Snappad on. Alright, back from the hardware store, and we're in the hot rod workshop today. We're going to try to get this Snappad modification figured out here. Shouldn't be too complex. We're just going to need a few minor tools, something you may all have at home. Going to need the lathe out, Most likely you may need a belt sander or bench grinder. Probably going to have to use the old Miller 211 for sure. Just your basic hand tools, nothing that a normal person wouldn't have at their house. Just kidding. I'm tired of seeing those do-it-yourself how-to videos, and they're like, yeah, you can do any of this. And they're using like $20,000 worth of specialty equipment or something. So we're gonna do this the easy peasy way. I even had to go out and buy a hacksaw because I don't know what happened to mine. Plus, for cutting into the rubber, I'm thinking it might be better because high-speed cutting in rubber would be creating a cloud in here like the burnout pits at the drag strip. And these are the only burnouts I want to have going on, not from that Snappad. Okay, before anybody goes to modify anything, you do not have to do this modification if you have at least 2 fingers worth of clearance between the metal foot pad on the stabilizer and your gray water pipe. We're using easy technical terms here, 2 fingers worth of a gap. I only have about 1 finger in there. So the Snappad is contacting my gray water pipe on my 23 Tab 320S Boondock. Now I did have a viewer mention that he has a CS model and he has plenty of clearance, and I think that makes sense because the CS model on the back end is flat and it might be slightly longer, so that means they moved the stabilizer jacks backwards a little bit, so he has more clearance. Now in other models of the Tab, there may be more clearance than what I have. I don't know if they changed things over the years or not on that. Okay, so nothing too complex here. I'm using my old Rockwell jaw horse to hold this, and all I did is clamp that on because I'm just going to use this to cut this edge off. You don't need this thing. You can use a bench or hold it really tight while you try to hacksaw that off or something, but I don't even know if they make these things anymore, but this thing is awesome. It folds all up. This slides in and out. And it's like a giant C-clamp, and you can hold like huge sheets of plywood and do all kinds of stuff with this thing. Pretty awesome. But anyways, like I said, you want to measure at least 2 fingers worth of clearance from this metal edge to your gray water. You need that much room to clear this. Now, like I said, I only have about this much room. And I normally don't measure anything unless it needs to be precise. So we're going to do some scientific guesstimation here. So I'm going to try to save a little meat on this edge at least to keep that on. And then what we're going to do is we're going to drill a hole right through here. And we're going to bolt this on just in case so it doesn't fall off on me. All right, we're going to come in here. And I'm going to very gently make a score mark. I've never hacksawed through rubber, I don't think, so we're going to see how this goes. We're just going to get that scored and continue to score this. It might even be easier to use a razor knife, to tell you the truth, but we'll see. Getting a little bit of a mark in there, but it's going to take a little bit. I'm going to try to come in on the edge here, nice and easy. I think for the ease of making this video, I'm going to use one more clamp here, or vice grip, whatever you want to call it, just to keep that held down. And we're going to see if we can go to town on this thing now. Just nice and easy to get it started. Like I said, we could use electric tools here, but I don't want high rates of speed in rubber because it's just going to burn and smoke. Okay, got my line marked all around here. And never do what I'm doing, because most of the time I have no idea what I'm doing and somehow it turns out right. But even using this, I can smell a little bit of burnt rubber there, but it's not bad. Alright, I'm going to get to sawing away at this and I'll bring you back at the cut time. I'm just working this thing one section at a time. I can smell that rubber heating up. Getting a little tougher towards the end here, dragging on all that rubber, so a little easier to come at it through a side maybe. And we'll come back over here. And we're almost through. There we go. Not too shabby for a hand tool cut. It don't need to be pretty, it just has to work. Not the most beautiful cut, but if I really want to, I can come back and clean that up with a belt sander. We just need to get an idea of how close this is going to be to scathing by here. Oh man, I think we're just going to squeeze by. I think that's going to work, guys. That is a hair clearance. All right, we are just about there, and to satisfy my OCD, I am going to use my belt sander. You don't have to do that. I just want it to look clean. But my guesstimations are almost exactly dead on every time I do something like that. I've been kind of lucky with eyeballing things. Now this step, up to you. You can figure out if you need to clean that up or not. Maybe just some sandpaper on a block of wood, or maybe just take it against the concrete and file a little off that way. And because I know my auto teacher is probably watching and I can hear him screaming, safety glasses, I will put on some safety glasses. And I don't think I've ever sanded rubber, but it's kind of working out, slow going. A little bit at a time. You don't want to do burnouts in the garage with a Snappad. There's definitely time for a new belt. I usually just use this for finishing purposes anyway. Alright, I think that came out pretty darn good. I'll have to show you in the light. And you can skip this step, but for my OCD, I wanted this looking pretty smooth and clean. But what you really need to pay attention to is that you have about 1/4 inch of meat from here to here. And I purposely carved this so it was a little thinner here, a little thicker there. I wanted to leave a little extra pad just so this thing holds on. But even though that's done, I'm going to put a screw through here anyway just to ensure this stays on. But came out pretty clean. Sanding it's kind of weird. It made a heck of a mess. I've never sanded rubber, I don't think. So I got to get that cleaned up. This is where that jaw horse comes in handy. Let me tell you what. I'm going to clamp this pad in here because we're going to drill a hole right through there. And before I get rolling on this one, I was down at the hardware store, and every application is different, so you may need to take yours down to the hardware store to get the correct size you need. But nothing too crazy here. Like I said, I don't even measure. I just look at things and figure it out. So what I ended up getting here was a tapered screw with a machine screw pitch here, so I could run a nylock nut up here and a washer. I went with all stainless steel so it doesn't rust. And let me tell you what, that was $1.29 per screw or bolt, 65 cents per nut, and 25 cents a washer. Hardware is getting crazy these days, man. I swear, in the last couple of years, this is getting nuts. I know it's stainless, but still. So we're gonna drill through here. I'm gonna do it on the outer one so I can keep track of it on the trailer. But all I did when I went to the hardware store was I just made sure that the screw or bolt fit right through that hole. And what I ended up coming up with here, because I'm gonna countersink these if I can, and I'll show you how to do that. And that's why I went with a taper to make this easy. I don't want to use my milling tools and get too precise for everybody out there. And by the way, the size on these are 1/4 1 1/4 inches long because of the way I'm going to inset this. And for those that don't know how to pick a drill bit, take the end of this and the end of your drill bit and match up a size that's the same size around, just like that. And I'm going to use my hand drill here because I know most households will most likely have a hand drill, not a fancy drill press. So we're just going to do it that way today. And if you don't have this elevated, make sure you put a block of wood underneath so you don't drill into your tabletop or something. All right, we're through. Let's see if this screw goes all the way through. We might have to widen our hole out since this is rubber. Definitely may need to ream it out a couple times. And you're going to have to use a drill bit that fits that hole perfect. Because that rubber likes to form itself closed, but that'll give us a nice tight fit. And it helps that screw lock in a little bit if it can catch some threading on the rubber. All right, next order of business. We're going to flip this around. And we're going to find our hole on the back side here. And I want to countersink this in because I don't want that screw hitting pavement or any other type of pad that I may put down. And same principle with lining up your drill bit. Make sure it's just the same size as the head of the screw. And we're just going to countersink this just enough. This bit's a little bit wonky, so I don't know if it's going to work. There we go. We're just going to let this eat at it. I'm not pushing all the way through on this. You know, like I said, I just want the head of this screw to sit flush inside after this is countersunk. And I think we're about there. Now that I know my depth, I'm going to show you a little hack or trick if you don't know this one already, so you can make sure the depth is equal on any other hole you drill, because I'm actually going to run a screw through all these pads anyway, just to make sure they don't walk away on me one day. Because these are actually pretty easy to take off, believe it or not. So I'm just going to wrap some tape right around that, some painter's tape anyway. And that'll give me a depth gauge of how deep I need to drill. All right, now our hole is done. We're going to see if this screw pokes through the other side and we can bolt it all together. Going to have to use our screwdriver because the threads are catching on the rubber. And I feel the screw coming through. And it's still going. I think we're going to have just enough room for our washer and lock nut. Probably don't need the washer, honestly. That lock nut would fit, but I like doing things the right way. Okay. As you can see, we are just about there. I got to go a little farther with the screw. I'll have to get a wrench to hold that nut. A little overkill on the wrench here. But my sockets are outside with the trailer, so I can do the rest of these outside. But you're just going to snug this nut up just enough. You don't need to go super tight with it. That's why we got a nylock nut here. And there we go. Just tight enough to go through the rubber, the pad, and get into the nylock nut. And we have a nice amount of inset. That way that screw doesn't rub all over something or concrete or asphalt. We didn't go all the way through the pads, so that's good. And this thing's going to be nice and sturdy and stay on for almost ever, I hope. Let's see if you can see that out in the sun now. I think that came out pretty clean for a hack job. We got our pad all back and bolted on. I will add that you will need to take your snap pad back off unless you use open-end wrenches, because it's hard to get that bolt back through while these pads are on. It'll hit.
But check this out. How is that for laser eye guesstimation? Pretty close. But it's gonna work. Smart thing to do is make sure it does not contact anything. I'm telling you, we got about 1/8 of a gap there. And for the rest of these, we're going to do them right on the trailer. I'm just going to put some of those screws in each one of these to ensure I don't lose my $130 tungsten welder. Good to go.
Well, not a terribly complicated job. I think I spent a whole 2 hours while filming and doing that, so I think most of you out there are capable of making that modification if you need to. And like I said, double check your tolerances and clearances because you may not even have to do this. Now, I did get in contact with Snappad. I gave them a call, and then I emailed them some pictures to show them what was going on. And of course, that isn't their problem or anything to do with their design. That has to do with trailer manufacturers changing designs depending on model years. So I made them aware of it, and it was very nice that they actually answer a phone. I wish more companies would actually answer a telephone. It makes it so much easier to explain things. And to those of you over at Snappad, I really appreciate you answering a phone. That's pretty awesome in this day and age. And once again, you may not have to make this modification, so check your tolerances. That's one thing I overlooked at measuring for these Snappads to make sure. I didn't even think about it hitting the gray water pipe. That was my fault. But either way, we are good to go and ready to plant and land this craft again. And as always, I hope that was a little bit of helpful info to you guys out there, and hopefully I demonstrated and explained that how-to well enough that you could understand it. Now that that's all said and done, in about a week and a half or so, I will be heading out on a camping trip. I'm going to be hitting a really cool campground. I've been to this place once before, and there's some pretty neat things in the area other than just the campground that we're going to check out. But I'll technically be back in the desert because this puts me at a closer location to Phoenix, so I can meet up with the Aldi serviceman or the Truma service technician. So I can have the 2-year flush done on my Aldi system. And as always, we'll see you in the next adventure.